City Sports Podcast.
And McAllister down the left field line. Connor Tate is going to round third. He will score. And rounding third is Blaylock. He will score. And the Dogs walk it off.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you are in the right place.
It's third down, Bryce Young's career. You need 10, play clock at 4. From the pocket, launching downfield, underthrown and intercepted. Kelee Ringo has an escort down the sidelines. All the way to the end zone, and Georgia is going to conquer the Crimson Tide.
Hosted by Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams.
Georgia on the mountaintop. Demons be gone, and the drought is over. National champions at long last.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Classic City Sports Podcast. It has been a couple weeks since we've been able to be on. 1 week was my fault, 1 week's Jonathan's fault because we're just traveling around and doing stuff around the holiday seasons and everything going on. So we apologize for that, but we did want to make sure we were here for you guys this week before or after Georgia Tech, and then obviously before the biggest game of the season against Alabama in the SEC championship game. So we've got a lot to cover today. Going to recap a little bit of yesterday's game, but probably spend most of our time focusing on the Alabama game upcoming and then the playoff implications that this game might have as we look forward to the rest of the season. Glad to see you guys jumping in the comments already. Dan, Zach, and Mr. Stan Williams, we appreciate all of y'all being in here, and Claire as well. Thank you for joining everybody, and hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving, a great weekend, a time with family and friends, and we're ready to get back into the football, swing of things. And Jonathan, how are we feeling?
Doing great. Got to take the week off from school last week. Ended up taking the week off from work as well, which, love, hate that. Always love a good break sometimes away from the grind, but man, always hate missing shows and seeing other people, Brooks and Christian and you. And I mean, that part sucks. But, Thanksgiving week is great. Got to watch a lot of football. Got to eat a lot of great food. Got to spend a lot of great time with family. And, yeah, you did skip Rudes. Rudes, thank you for also being
here. My bad, brother.
I mean, my
goodness. I did not mean to skip you. I was trying to do it real quick as I was going through my little quick intro. Rudes, I definitely did not forget about you. I apologize for that. I love you.
But yeah, I mean, great week of that. Georgia Tech game, while it was a night game, which is first time since I think 2009. So that's been a hot minute. Maybe a lot would have been better if it was in Athens, of course, but it was in Atlanta. Maybe not the greatest of football games, but hey, main goal was you finish 12-0 in the regular season and you get into the SEC championship game. You've checked off 2 of those things. 3 straight perfect seasons started, or perfect regular seasons started. How crazy is that? 3 years in a row now, 36-0 in the regular season. I mean, that is we just need to take a minute and sit there and realize how big of an accomplishment that in itself is. Even the 2 national titles, of course, that's sugar on top, but 3 straight undefeated regular seasons. I mean, what does losing even feel like anymore? I can't even remember what it feels like, to be honest.
You don't know what it feels like to lose at this point in the regular season. It has been one of those things that you don't know what it feels like to lose as a Georgia fan anymore. You haven't lost a game in a couple of seasons at this point. You're 29 games in, winning straight, and that's an SEC record at this point. And now you're going for 30 against Alabama this weekend. But it literally doesn't feel like anything. You don't expect to lose every Saturday at this point. You don't expect to lose during the regular season 3 years in a row. I've looked at going into last season, we looked at the schedule ahead of time and said, I don't see a game that you lose this year. We went into this season saying, I don't see a game that you lose this year when you look at the regular season schedule. And that's something that's impossible to think about when you go 3 straight years doing that. And yeah, you have a loss mixed in there, against Alabama in the SEC championship game, but then you ended up winning a national championship anyways. And so you don't really think about that anymore. It kind of gets wiped away from you. Georgia fans are extremely spoiled at this point. And it's a great thing to be like, this is the best moment as a Georgia fan in everyone's life, outside of the people that were around, in 1980 and those couple years where they were going to the national championship and playing for it for so many years. But I would say it's even better than that, because back then they only won one of them. They were just having good seasons getting up to it, and then they would lose. Georgia's won 2 in a row, gone undefeated 3 straight seasons in the regular season, and has a good opportunity to go for a three-peat this year. You do have a huge hurdle on Saturday against Alabama, which you are a 5-point favorite in, I think is the last I saw it. So we'll see how that changes over the week. But you go through a game like that. You're going into a game against Georgia Tech this past weekend, yesterday, and you think you're going to blow them out. The spread's 24 points, I think. And guess what? You kind of take one on the chin for a little bit, because Georgia Tech came out playing. And something I did not expect to say after this game was I have a lot of respect for what Brent Key and Buster Faulkner and them are doing over there at Georgia Tech, and the offense that they have done. I noticed that. I haven't really paid attention to Georgia Tech this season until you had posted the stat thread on Monday last week going into the game. And I looked at it and I was reading through it and I was like, dang. And I have a good friend of mine that's a Georgia Tech fan. And I even texted him. I said, man, Georgia Tech's got a good offense this year. Like, I'm surprised. Like, of years past, they got away from the triple option. They had to get to a traditional style. They had to get some players in there to do it. And they actually are scoring some points. They're scoring a decent amount of points a game. Problem is, they give up a lot of points. And that's why they're losing a lot of the games this year and ended up 6-6. But they came out there, and Buster was definitely in his bag against Georgia on Saturday.
I mean, there's a reason why many loved Buster Faulkner during his time at Georgia. There was quite a few people that thought when Todd Monken was headed out the door that Buster Faulkner might be the guy that steps into that offensive coordinating role for Georgia. But then, of course, he goes ahead and takes the OC gig over at Georgia Tech. Probably best for him and best for Georgia as well, because Georgia ended up with Mike Bobo. And now Georgia Tech is over there rolling with Buster Faulkner. The only downside for Georgia Tech is I don't know how much longer you get to hold on to Buster Faulkner at Georgia Tech, because boy, oh boy, people are going to be calling his name, trying to get him to be the OC of their football team at some bigger jobs. But yeah, Buster Faulkner called an incredible game. I mean, really, Georgia Tech, all they need, they got into Haynes King. Haynes King is a good quarterback. We saw him flash a little bit over at Texas A&M, so you got yourself a quarterback. The running back was really impressive. The running game in general was super impressive, but that also has to do with the fact that, it's kind of what Georgia Tech has always had at quarterback. They've had an athlete, and Haynes King is exactly that. I wouldn't necessarily call him a dual threat, but, I mean, he definitely adds into the run game, and he is very much a runner at the quarterback position. And it's a very unique way. It was a very different style of Georgia Tech football in the sense of it's not just pure triple option football. We're going to run our head into a wall for the entire 4 quarters of a football game. It was just a big, they kind of sprinkled in some passing games, and, they had the big pass to Brett Seither, who's also a former Bulldog. Dominic Blaylock's over there. So they've gotten some good athletes in the transfer portal. I've always said that there is no excuse for Georgia Tech to be as bad as they have been for the last 10 years or so, because Georgia is a hotbed for recruits. And if whoever Georgia isn't recruiting or whoever Georgia isn't getting, Georgia Tech should be getting a lot of those leftovers, and they should be getting a lot of those other athletes that are in the state of Georgia. And you should be a competitive football team. And that's what they've turned into under Brent Key. And that's what they have a great offense under Buster Faulkner. The only problem is your defense still is just pretty abysmal. And so, but once they get those things straightened out, if this rivalry does continue, maybe this does get a little more interesting in the future.
Yeah, I would say, and after sitting there and I was standing on the field and I was actually around some of the Georgia Tech players were out of the box, like the ones that weren't actually playing. They're wearing sweats in their jersey and stuff, but they were actually out of the coach's box down to like the 15-yard line. So they were almost in my way. I was about to get mad at a couple of them a few times during the game. And then, but I was sitting there listening to them talk. And I even said to one of them at one point, I was like, man, y'all are going to be competitive in this game in the next few years under Brent Key, because I really do think that you're on the right trajectory right now. Like, seeing what he's doing, it is going to take some time to build it up. I always say you have to give a head coach 3 to 4 years at any program, no matter where it is, whether it's, Alabama when Saban retires, or it's, Georgia if something ever happened with Kirby, or, right now we're looking at Billy Napier in Florida. They're struggling. They went 5-7 this year after losing last night to FSU. You still have to give him at least 2 more years, in my opinion, to see if he gets those recruits coming in and can actually change the environment and change the structure of that program. And so for Brent Key, it's the same thing. It's his first year as a head coach, and he went 6-6. He's bowl eligible. And I can't remember. I don't think they went bowl eligible last year with Jeff Collins. I don't think they made it.
No way.
I think they were close. They might have had like 5 wins or something. They were close last year. I had to look back. If somebody wants to say that in the comments, that'd be great. But they weren't quite there. But anyways, you take over and you get them bowl eligible this year. Like you're talking about, the offense has been a lot better than what we've seen over the past few years. They've been in big games this year. They've won some big games. They should have beat Louisville at one point this year. They beat Miami this year. They've had some good games, and so they're not a terrible football team anymore. But it does take a couple more seasons. I'd say you got to give him 2 to 3 more years to see if he can build that program up. And I think that, I'm not saying they beat Georgia in the next 2 to 3 years, but they will beat. But I bet you anything that in the next 2 to 3 years, Georgia and Georgia Tech is a game that it's not going to be a 24-point spread anymore. It's probably like a 10-point spread or something a lot closer, or something that people are expecting a little bit better of a game moving forward, because I think they're on the right trajectory. They definitely played a lot better than people expected yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, and just going over the game in general, I mean, obviously nobody expected this to be an 8-point win for Georgia. Like you mentioned, it was a 24-point spread in favor of Georgia. Now, when I looked at that spread, I was like, wow, that's a lot of points. I don't know that I would be taking that. I don't know that Georgia's going to cover that, because I did know what Georgia Tech had on offense. I figured that they would be able to score points. And then you get in the football game, and one of Georgia's biggest enemies this season has been the first possession on defense. Teams have gone down the field and scored, and you get a stop, and you're like, oh gosh, maybe Georgia is just going to rout these guys today. Maybe they showed up for business and they're going to just take it to them, and the game ends up being closer than what you thought. But I think a lot of things played into that. First things first, you didn't have Brock Bowers. You knew you probably weren't going to have Ladd McConkey, and you didn't have him. Ra Thomas, you didn't have him either. That's like 75% of your receiving offense this year between those three guys. I mean, that is a big chunk of your production in the receiving game. So you didn't have any of those guys. And then you have some weird turnovers, like you and I mentioned when we were talking before the show, like the fumble on like the very first offensive possession. Yeah. That's just weird, man. Stuff that was happening.
It was the very first play they ran on offense, too.
Exactly. So just, weird fumble. And then even the Carson Beck interception, as frustrating as it was, it seems like every Carson Beck interception this year has been like, golly, like just a freak tip, bounce, and went into the defender's hands, and they got a turnover off of it. Same thing when they played Ole Miss. It was like Carson Beck threw a good ball. It just freaking bounced the wrong way, and the defender got it. It actually happened twice.
That almost happened earlier. Yeah, happened earlier. It just got reversed because it happened to hit the ground, but it popped up on the big screen. They wouldn't give you a good replay or slow enough to really tell. They wouldn't give you a slow enough replay to be able to tell if it hit the ground. And so I'm sitting there watching like, I really hope that hit the ground. I really do, because like that's not an intercepting like pass. Like that is a terrible pass to get picked off. Like it's at the ground. It could be caught. It shouldn't be an interception by any means. And luckily they finally got a good view at some point and showed that it hit the ground. And I was very relieved, because that would have been 2 in that game. That would have been like crazy, bounced up, all the stuff like that picked off. But Georgia spotted them 14 points off those 2 turnovers.
Yeah. I mean, that's
a big deal.
Kind of there's been a story of the defense is if the offense is going to turn the ball over, it's typically going to result in points for the defense. I mean, pretty much if Georgia turns the ball over, you can go ahead and put 7 points up on the board, because it puts a defense in a tough situation. And, it's tough to bounce back from that defensively, especially when you got some momentum rolling for them. But you want to talk about bad production. You were saying you didn't get any replays in the stadium. The TV production that ABC put on Saturday was one of the worst I have ever had to sit through and watch. Let me tell you, Stoddard, every play that was challenged, every play that was reviewed, this is what would happen. We would see one replay of it, and then it would be a 3-minute commercial break. We would come back, and the decision would already have been discussed and made, and we wouldn't even most of the time, we didn't even listen to the refs say what happened. The freaking analyst would tell you, oh, well, they decided that it was an incomplete pass or whatever. It was horrible.
So
it felt like after every play we sat through 3 minutes.
I noticed that like 2 or 3 times, because I saw that the red hat was still on the stadium and still on the field, and it showed like a minute and a half left in the commercial break or whatever. And the ref would literally come out in the middle of that and tell us what happened. And so I knew that had to be what was going on, because like the ref didn't even wait until the TV timeout was over. He would come out on the field with a minute and a half left in the commercial break and tell you. He did that 2 or 3 times that I can remember. And it was just, that's bizarre.
It was
That's
horrible.
weird. I don't think I've ever seen them do that before.
It was a horrible
But
production all
this
around.
reffing crew wasn't the best in the world in the first place. So I'm not going to blame the game on like penalties. I hate when people do that. So I'm not. There were some questionable calls, but there were also a couple calls that I saw that could have gone against Georgia for in favor of Georgia Tech that did not as well. So I'm not going to say it was like a ref reasoning in this game. But going back to what I asked the question in the chat, biggest takeaways from the game yesterday, and Rudes was posting a couple of things on there. Yeah, edge defense is still hurting you. The people that run the stretch run and quarterback run on the outside is getting you pretty heavy. You are correct that your DBs should not be leading team in tackles in a game. But one thing I wanted to focus on that you talked about was the inside linebacker play. I noticed in the first half of this game, we had Raylan Wilson out there. We had Jalen Walker out there. Like guys that don't really play were out there in the first half of this football game. And that tells you a lot about why those linebackers weren't necessarily in the right places a lot. Smile was kind of on and off the field. He was kind of a limited participant in this game. He wasn't out there all the time. And CJ Allen was getting a lot of play. One thing I noticed that every time they were throwing downfield, it felt like outside of like the couple that you saw go towards one of our DBs, like a lot of them felt like we had a linebacker in coverage. CJ Allen seemed to be targeted several times in that football game. So they found some type of matchup that put him in man coverage against Haynes. Who is their running back? I can't remember the name. Haynes.
I know his last name
or
was
Haynes something. I can't remember, but he used to be a wide receiver. And so you put that guy against your linebacker several times throughout the game, and it's a mismatch. And they exploited that all game long. They were exploiting that. I saw CJ Allen. He made a couple plays, but he got beat multiple times as well because it's hard to cover a guy like that for CJ Allen.
Yeah, I mean, there was even one play though where he was step for step with the running back. It was the ball kind of down the right side of the boundary, and I mean, I was like, whoa! I was like, who the heck was in coverage? I was like, is that freaking CJ Allen? I mean, it was a deep ball down the boundary, and he was in pretty good coverage. I mean, it was about as good of coverage as you could ask from your inside linebacker. And, I think, and that's why I think this game, I don't think Georgia fans should take it too much to heart from this Georgia Tech game, just because it was just one of those end of the season classic Georgia games where Georgia goes in there. They don't beat a team like we think they're supposed to. They kind of struggle a little bit. Things don't look the way that we want it to, but Georgia comes out with a win. It happened last year against Kentucky. I know weather had played a role in that, but just like this year, injuries probably played a role in what happened yesterday as well. And I think also the fact that Carson Beck only threw the ball 20 times and you ran the ball a crap ton. I think that just
they ran the ball 41 times or something like that, didn't they? Something crazy.
That really just showed me of like Georgia came in this game like, we're going to go in there, we're going to run the ball, we're going to do what we need to do to win this game, and then we're going to get out of here and we're going to go focus on Alabama. You can't afford any more injuries. And so I think Georgia was like, let's just get out of here with a win. It doesn't have to look pretty. It didn't look pretty. You had some things go the wrong way. Georgia Tech played one heck of a football game, but I think that's also something that you should take note of is Georgia played one heck of a football game, but really the game never fell out of hand. Like nobody realistically, at least I didn't. I was never sitting there thinking, oh, Georgia Tech is about to pull off an upset potentially. I never thought that. When they pulled it within 8, and they went for an onside kick, there was never a point in my mind where I was like, oh, wow, Georgia Tech might actually come in here and hand us an L this season. The game always felt like it was under control. And like I said, you got out of there with a win. That was the most important thing. And now you're 12-0, and you're heading in the SEC championship game. And if you look at it on paper, it looks like you had a fantastic season, which you did outside of a couple of games. That's it.
Yeah, there was a couple games last year that we talked about as well that weren't so great, that everybody wanted to focus on last season. We had a couple early this season, and they've really hit their stride in the second half of the season up until this game. The last 4 or 5 games prior to this one, you've really been just rolling and haven't really struggled that much. You've played good. You've been on the right path, and it's one of those things that Josh Pate likes to talk about. When you get into November, you can kind of tell the trajectory of a team and see if it's like a off game or something like that, or if it's just they are just rolling and you're putting it together and together. So you see that there's just an off game on there. But yeah, Georgia ran the ball 39 times and only threw the ball 20 times yesterday. And Georgia, I felt like that's the part that kind of bothered me a little bit, but you didn't have to do it. And the running game was working, especially with Milton. He was just absolutely going crazy. But after that first touchdown drive, it was a 29-yard touchdown drive to Dominic Lovett, or a 29-yard touchdown pass to Dominic Lovett. and it was wide open. And I felt like Georgia didn't try to stretch the field in the pass game anymore. They really focused on the run game, and that's fine. I don't have a problem with that because it worked, but I feel like there were a lot of yards that got left on the field because they decided they wanted to focus on the run game, which we knew they were going to do. Brooks came out and told everybody prior to the game that it was going to be a run heavy offense because they were going to, I think Georgia Tech gave up 235 yards a game on the ground prior to that game, and Georgia ran for 282 against them. So if it works, keep doing it. But Georgia could have gotten a little bit more production through the air as well. I just think that wasn't their game plan, and so they didn't do it this time.
Yeah, I mean, at one point, Kendall Milton was averaging 10 yards per carry. So at that point, why the heck would you not just keep handing it to number 2 and let him eat? And that's exactly what they did. The dude finished with 159 rushing yards. He's had one heck of an end of season. Nobody deserves it more than Kendall Milton. Not to say that Daijun Edwards, of course, isn't deserving of success, which he's already had a lot of success this season, but knowing what Kendall Milton has been through over the last 3 years, injury-wise, and just kind of figuring out his way in the lineup, and every time he would get back out there, he never looked like his true self. He never looked like that freshman running back that we saw against Auburn and a few times that season where it's like, whoa, that guy's a dude. He runs hard, he plays physical, and he makes the first guy miss. That's what we've seen over the last 3 weeks from Kendall Milton. And that's been a joy to watch. I tweeted, I was like, man, I'm so glad that we have gotten to watch Kendall Milton terrorize defenses this year because everybody saw it. Everybody knew that he had it in him to go out there and rush for over 100 yards nearly every freaking game and average 6 yards or whatever per carry every single time he touched the ball. And that's what we finally got to see. And he's peaking at the right time. And Daijun Edwards, like I said, he's been rolling this entire year. He's played well. And I think that 1-2 punch between those guys, that's a great thing to have going into this football game against Alabama. And
it's
even
great. It's great to
even going in the passing game. I'll make this one last point. That freaking ball to Dylan Bell that was not
beautiful.
That was called an incompletion. That's a freaking dot. So there were still some major highlights from the passing game that weren't necessarily called and weren't necessarily put into the stat sheet. But Carson Beck was still out there dealing.
Fun fact on that pass play, I almost got laid out because that ball was caught like 5 yards in front of me, and then their momentum took them like right towards me on it. It was kind of fun. So I had to kind of scramble for a second there. But going back to Kendall Milton real quick, because I texted this stat to y'all earlier and I wanted to put it on the show. In the first 7 games that he played this season, he's only played in 10, including this one. So he missed a couple games this season. In the first 7 games that he played this season, he only had 295 yards rushing. In the last 3 games, so going to Ole Miss, Tennessee, and Georgia Tech, he had 349 yards rushing. So he went over his season total in 3 games that he had in 7 games prior. So I think he's finally healthy. I was talking to another friend, and they always talked about him, said he always looked kind of like he run a little timid and he wasn't bursting through a hole and stuff throughout his career. And that is something he has done so well the past couple games where he just gets it and he shoots like a cannonball and just goes. And then he runs through people. He's made people miss. Like, he looks like a different type of Kendall Milton that we've seen all year or seen in his career, honestly. And I think it's a lot to do with the fact that he feels real healthy and he feels real confident in himself right now. And that's a huge difference maker when you're confident in your abilities and confident in what you're trying to do. You're seeing the hole and you're shooting through it real quick. And I think that's what's changed with him. And I'm loving seeing it because he's a guy that I've been looking at his entire career and just saying, I know this kid is really good. I know he is. I just don't think we're getting as much as we can out of him. And now he's giving it to you. And like you said a minute ago, at the right time, because now we're going into the big stretch of the season. So you showed that you could do it over the last 3 games. And now we got, Alabama this weekend. And hopefully we got the playoffs coming right after that for a game or 2 there and going for a national championship. So the next 3 games, potentially, if he could do the same kind of thing that he's done over the past 3 games, Georgia's going to be in very good hands, but with that 1-2 punch with Daijun Edwards and Kendall Milton.
Yeah, let's go ahead and get into this SEC championship matchup between Georgia and Alabama. The matchup that everybody wants to see every single year in the SEC for the last 5 years. Everybody's been wanting to see Georgia, Alabama every single year, and they've gotten it for the most part. I mean, these 2 teams have met quite a bit since Kirby Smart has gotten to Georgia, and it's always a fun one. And it's always going to be a good game. And I think this week is going to be another one of those close, nail-biting games because both teams are really good. Alabama, especially. I think in the month of November, they've averaged 46 points per game. So this is a team that is rolling. This is a team that has found their stride, much like Georgia has in the month of November. And both teams are tested at this point. They played some really good opponents. And I think it's just well balanced because I think both teams kind of are the same thing. Deep, like both teams, great defenses. Both teams have really good secondaries. Terry and Arnold and Kool-Aid McKinstry, both really good corners. And then Caleb Downs, the freshman, that guy's a baller. I know that he's going to have his freshman mistakes, but that's a playmaker, much like Georgia has in their back end as well. So really interested to see how this goes. One thing that I do think is different from all the years that Georgia has played Alabama, going all the way back to 2021, is the biggest thing for Georgia going into this game was the question of, is our offense going to be able to hang with theirs? Is our offense going to be able to have success against their defense? Well, this is the best offense you've had under Kirby Smart. This is the most successful offense if you had, the most efficient offense that you've had. So there's no question of if you're going to be able to score points, if you're going to be able to have success. Now it's just a matter of how is the defense going to match up against Alabama's offense now with Jalen Milroe playing some really good football.
Jalen Milroe he came onto the scene kind of late this year. At the beginning of the season, it was one of those things you're looking at him, and we even talked. I mean, he got benched, right? Like he got benched after the Texas game. Or before the Texas game. I'm sorry. Didn't he? Was it before or after the Texas game? I think it was after the Texas game.
Mm-hmm. It was
after. They lost to Texas. So they lost to Texas. Week 3 comes in and they start their backup. And then, they go to a third quarterback in that game and they don't even go back to Milroe in game 3 after going through the other two guys. The guy from Notre Dame, Tyler Buchner.
Tyler Buchner and Simpson.
Yeah. Ty Simpson. So Tyler Buchner and then Ty Simpson, both of those guys play in that game. They don't go back to Milroe in that. But then in week 4, after that game, they go back to him, and then he started to play a lot better. And, he's not like a world beater in the sense of his stats aren't insane. He's not throwing 3,500 yards and rushing for 700 yards or something like that in the same season. But he has gotten really good, really at the right time. And, they almost lost yesterday to Auburn. It literally came down to a muffed punt, gave them the possession they needed, and then they needed a miracle on 4th and 31, and they got it, and that was it. So, good teams find a way to win when you don't think they can. Sometimes luck is involved, and that's okay. Like that, they are in that situation because they put themselves in a situation that one play could flip the entire game, and it did. So, I don't put that much on. It doesn't matter. They're playing for the same stakes that we thought they would be before that game was played afterwards. So, but Milroe, he's got about 2,500 yards passing, 2,600 yards passing on the year, and he's ran for about 450 yards on the season. So that's the part that I'm concerned about because what we have seen against Georgia this season multiple times, going back to Spencer Rattler in South Carolina, is a quarterback that can run terrorizes our defense at times because we can't seem to contain him. And then now I will say that, he's not exactly a designed quarterback runner as much as he's a scramble and then makes an extra play with his legs afterwards. So it changes things a little bit there. But if you can't contain him in the pocket, he's going to have a lot of opportunities to do that. And you got to put pressure on him so he can't have all day to figure that out. If you let him sit back there for 5 seconds looking for a receiver downfield, he's either going to find one or he's going to find a gap to run through. And so that's the biggest focus is those edge guys that we've seen have trouble at Georgia this entire season is they've got to be able to contain them. They have to. That is key number 1 for this game on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that Georgia did a really good job of against Ole Miss, playing a guy like Jackson Dart, Jackson Dart, they put design runs in for him, and he very much runs like a running back. He does not run like a quarterback, and they do a lot of different things with him. But I think that's one thing Georgia did well against him, and what they had to do against a guy like Brady Cook as well is you don't pass rush against a guy like Jalen Milroe to sack him or to break into the pocket or anything like that. You have to contain him, and you almost have to push like a wall, like in unison. You have to move up the field together to keep him in the pocket. So that's going to be a big thing for Georgia on Saturday. They've had a lot of reps having to do it this year, and so that's a plus side for them. And there's been at times where they have had success against running quarterbacks. But I'm glad you pointed out the fact that Jalen Milroe is not a guy that is looking to run. This is a guy that is looking to scramble. He wants to run outside of the pocket and then throw a deep shot. And it's why their offense has been so successful as of late because when they do pass the ball, they're looking to hit it explosive. They're looking to get it to Jermaine Burton. They're looking to get it to Isaiah Bond for a big gain. And that's also one thing that Georgia does a really good job of is keeping the explosives, maintaining the explosives, especially with how good our secondary is. But with that being said, one thing that has gotten Georgia, especially over the past couple of years, is quarterbacks that can scramble around the pocket a little bit and extend those plays. That's when the protection and when the when the defense kind of breaks up a little bit and we see those big passes. I mean, that was the story of the Ohio State game. Couldn't do anything with CJ Stroud, and he would just run outside the pocket and he'd find Marvin Harrison or one of those really good wide receivers that they have for a big gain. So that's the big goal for Georgia, is you got to keep him contained. Just like you said, keep him within the pocket, make him uncomfortable. Don't let him play his style of football. You want to make him be a quarterback, make him be a processor, and make him be decisive with the football.
Yeah, that's the biggest thing, and I'm glad you brought up the Ohio State game, because that's the kind of vibe I get from this game. Like, you got teams that are scoring. Georgia's just under 40 points a game, I believe, at this point, and Alabama's right around 35 points a game. And like you said, in November they've been scoring a ton, averaging 40 plus points in that time frame, and they're very similar in the sense of what you're going up against Ohio State to Alabama this year. Not quite as explosive on offense as Ohio State was last year, but they have the same style quarterback play. And the biggest thing is your defensive backs don't have to worry about him beating you over top a ton, because that's not exactly what he plays. But you do have to worry about the style where he scrambles out and buys extra time, because when that happens, you give a guy 6-7 seconds, they're going to have a receiver downfield. Like you just said a second ago, that's what Ohio State did to Georgia. It was the most frustrating thing watching that game in the Peach Bowl last year, because, man, he's got all the time in the world. Of course, Marvin Harrison Jr. gets open at some point. How would he not get open after that much time? You can't ask a defensive back to cover him for that long. So that's going to be the biggest thing, is that, like I said, containing him in that pocket, and then, maybe have a spy or something to kind of help with it. But I know Georgia doesn't love to spy. They like to have their zone or different ways. But it's a game that you're going to have to have somebody at least keeping an eye on him. If it's not an official spy, you might be running a zone in the middle or something like that, but you need to be very, vigilant of like what he is doing and paying attention to, his motions, and kind of stay in front of him so he doesn't beat you on a big play. Cause that's where Georgia could get in trouble is, if he hits a 5-6 yard scramble, it is what it is. But if it's a 3rd and 8, and you let him scramble for 12, 13 yards, that's the stuff that's going to kill you. It's like paper cuts at that point. You can't let that happen. And that's something I want to see from Georgia on Saturday, is just kind of keeping him in that pocket. Don't give him too much time, and just kind of, just give your defensive backs a chance, because they can cover Jermaine Burton. Like, he's their leading receiver. He's got about 750 yards on the season. He's a great receiver. We know that. We know he played well at Georgia. And it is going to be interesting to see that matchup with him in Atlanta playing against Georgia, because he's the type of guy. I'm kind of segueing the conversation for a second just because my brain works that way. That's on me. But he's the type of guy I saw him kind of starting stuff with Auburn, student section, kind of flipping them off after the game and doing stuff. I kind of expect some emotion in this game from Jermaine Burton.
Yeah, I mean, the way that Georgia fans have treated that guy since he went to Alabama, I mean, my gosh, I was one of the people that when he transferred and everybody was just dogging him on Twitter, I'm like, guys, why do you care what Jermaine Burton is doing at Alabama? Why are we throwing this guy under the bus? Why are we dogging him? I felt there was no need for it. He helped you get your first national title. He helped you beat Alabama the first time. And if he wants to transfer out because Ladd McConkey is starting to get reps from him and he can't find a spot to where he can be the main guy, then whatever. But I mean, yeah, there's obviously going to be emotion for him, because I guarantee you he's seen what's been said about him from Georgia fans on Twitter every single week. I mean, there for a while, every single game he played where he had 13 yards, it was getting blasted all over Twitter like, oh, Jermaine Burton was hot today. Yeah. 1 reception, 13 yards, 0 touchdowns with all the flame emojis. So, yeah, there's going to be a lot of emotion for him there, but there's also going to be a lot of emotion all around that football field, because Georgia knows what's at stake this weekend. They know that they can get to 30 straight victories on Saturday. They know that if they can beat Alabama and Nick Saban 2 times in a row and go to the college football playoff and knock them out this year, something that they wanted to do in 2021 but failed to. So there's a lot of emotion in general in this football game. And I'm just excited for it. I'm excited to see it, because I think this is really the first time, even in that 2021 year, Georgia fans and Georgia in general was feeling good about themselves, just because Alabama in a very similar way this year was coming off of a sketchy game against Auburn. And then coming in the SEC championship game is like, oh, Georgia should handle them. This game shouldn't even be close. And then Alabama routs them. But I just, it's going to be a close game. It's going to be a good football game. I think these teams are very evenly matched, and man, it would be pretty sweet though to be able to knock Alabama out of the playoff. I cannot lie.
Oh, for sure. And Dan, I agree. No love lost for Burton. I wasn't like when he left, it wasn't one of those things that like it killed me. I was more upset seeing AD Mitchell go. Now, when I say that, I don't dislike Burton because he did it. At the same time, I'm more indifferent to him at Alabama, and it is what it is. We'll see how things play out on Saturday.
Who
He
cares,
gets
though?
to
That's
come
my
play.
thing, you know?
That's what I'm saying. I'm indifferent to it. I don't.
Yeah.
It really doesn't make a difference. He could go out there and have 150 yards receiving against Georgia, and I'm sure Alabama fans will be like, "Hey, I bet you missed this guy," because I've already been seeing that over the past couple of days from Alabama fans. And honestly, no, because we have Lad McConkey, we have Ra Thomas, we have Dominic Lovett and Brock Bowers, and those guys, they're all playing very well. And honestly, and now Dylan Bell is stepping up a big time for us. Like we don't really now he would be featured in this offense. I feel especially with Lad being out like he's been this season, I feel like he would have had a big season with us. But I'm indifferent. It is what it is. He's gone. Like no love lost, no hard feelings. Let's just get through it and be fine. But let's talk about this because you brought this up, talking about playoff hopes. I want to finish the show kind of talking about the playoff scenario situation. Like, do you think, I'm going to pose the question to you this way. If Georgia were to lose on Saturday, with things kind of the way that they're sitting, do you think Georgia needs help to get in? Because I personally think Georgia would need help to get in if they don't win on Saturday.
I definitely think you would need help to get in, just because, you look at the number of one-loss teams. We know for a fact Michigan's going to be in there. Lord, if they lose to Iowa, you didn't deserve anything in this world if you find a way to lose to Iowa this weekend. So we're going to go ahead and count Michigan into the playoff. If Texas wins, of course they're in. And here's the thing too. If Alabama beats Georgia and they get put in and Texas wins, I feel like you got to put Texas in as well. Otherwise, we're saying that these regular season wins do not matter. So then at that point, Georgia they need Florida State to lose, because undefeated Florida State deserves to be put into the college football playoff.
They're not losing to Louisville. That's arguing with you. They're not losing to Louisville, though. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, for sure. And then Oregon, you would also need Oregon to beat Washington. And then at that point, the big debate is between Oregon and Georgia, because of one-loss Florida State, they're not getting in. And then you're debating upon if Oregon should get in or if Georgia should get in. And that's a tough argument. There is going to be some tough conversations had on that Sunday if Alabama does indeed beat Georgia. That's the committee's worst nightmare, is for Alabama to go in there and beat Georgia, because all hell is going to break loose. There's even going to be conversations of should Ohio State get put in, because it happened last year. Ohio State was not in the Big Ten championship game last year, but they got put into the college football playoff. And I know it's different situations, but it has happened before. And there's going to be some tough conversations. That's why every time someone asks me this question, I'm like, as the way I see it, you got to take care of business regardless. Who cares? Like, you have to win anyways. You have to view it as that. You do not have, you cannot view this game of, oh, well, Georgia's been great all year, so a loss, it really shouldn't matter. We're one of the 4 best teams. Freaking win, and it doesn't matter. You win, and you don't have to have this conversation. You win, you're the number 1 seed regardless.
Yeah, real quick, Dan, the committee, you may say that they want 2 Big Ten teams. I don't see a scenario where you get 2 Big Ten teams this year, because I don't see the same thing as I don't see you getting 2 SEC teams in this year either. Like I just don't think it would happen in this situation because of everything, the way it stacks up. So you got Michigan playing against Iowa on Saturday. That's, like you said, that's a win for Michigan. The biggest game is going to be Washington and Oregon, and the winner of that game is in. So we got 2 teams right there. And I know you just talked through this, but I'm going to talk through my part of it as well. You got Texas playing Oklahoma State, right? They're not even playing Oklahoma. The team they lost to this year, they didn't even make the Big 12 championship game. They're out. So it's Oklahoma State that they're playing. I think I'm going to leave them on the outs for a second. I'm not going to count that as one of my in teams right now, because I think it comes down to Georgia and FSU of whether or not they can get in. Because if Georgia wins, obviously they're in. If FSU wins, they're in. So Texas is out. But let's say that, if Georgia were to lose that game, I think FSU is in. I'm going to put them as a 3rd team real quick, because I don't see them losing to Louisville, because they just beat Florida. It was a close enough game for a while, but they won that game. They covered the spread. I don't think they have a problem beating Louisville. Louisville just lost to Kentucky. So I'm going to put those 3 teams as my 3 teams. I've got 4 fingers up. 3 teams that I have in right now. So that last finger, the last team is going to go between, if Georgia wins, they're in. There's no question about it. But if Georgia were to lose, Texas is in. At that point, Texas is in, because Texas would be a Big 12 champion. They beat Bama. And like you said a minute ago, they have to, acknowledge the head-to-heads. Otherwise, why are we even playing football games at this point? They are in. And so that's your 4 teams. So Georgia and Bama get left out. Ohio State gets left out. Even Oregon, I think, gets left out at that point. Or no, I put them in already. I'm sorry. I was looking at my phone and I got distracted. So one of those teams would be in. But I think Georgia, Alabama, and Ohio State get left out in that scenario unless Louisville were to lose. If Louisville does not lose or win in that game over Florida State, if Louisville does not beat Florida State, then those are my 4 teams. That's how it's going to go, because I don't see Texas losing to Oklahoma State at this point. Like I said, they're not even playing Oklahoma that they lost to this season.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I will note about this Georgia-Alabama game, and it's one thing that I really admire about Kirby Smart and I really admire about this football team, is, the end goal, of course, is to win a national title. And that is what you want to end up doing. That is what you want to be crowned as ultimately at the end of the season. Nothing else matters. As long as you're hoisting up the trophy at the end of the season, that's all anybody cares about. But SEC championships are a huge deal to this team. I remember Curious Jackson talking about it a year ago, where he was like, I've never won an SEC championship game. This is a year after winning a national title. And he said, I've never won the SEC title. And that's something that I want to do. And Kirby said it this year.
Yeah.
He talked about how people do not realize how big of a deal it is to win the SEC. And I think the team acknowledges that. I think Kirby Smart acknowledges that. And that is something that they strive for. They want it so desperately and so badly. And of course, winning the SEC puts you in a great position in the playoff as well. But they are hungry every single year to get the SEC title. And of course, it's sugar on top that you get to play Alabama and that you would do it against Alabama. But I think that these guys are highly motivated, and I don't want to make any excuses for it. But in 2021, the whole talking point for us was, oh, well, it doesn't matter what happens to Georgia. Just keep it close enough and you're going to be in the playoff and we're going to be all right. That was the whole talking point. I think you kind of saw that on the field a little bit. They kind of went into that football game, whether they admit it or not, of kind of the feeling of, it doesn't really matter what happens. We're going to be put in the playoff. This year, it's not like that. It is win or go home football from here on out for every single team that is playing this weekend and for the remainder of the season in the college football playoff. So big game on Saturday. When the Dogs have to show up, when they have to play these big games, they've shown it this year where they've struggled a little bit. But in those 3 weeks where they really had to show up, in those 4 weeks where they really had to make it matter, boy, they've played some really damn good football. And that's kind of the Georgia that I'm expecting on Saturday. But at the same time, that's the same Alabama that I'm expecting as well.
So that is exactly where I sit. And I was thinking about it after watching the game yesterday. I thought back through this season, and I thought back through the past couple of seasons, and I looked at it like this and said, anytime Georgia has needed a big game, anytime Georgia's needed to step up, you got Ohio State last year, you're going to have to score a lot of points. You got to outscore them because that team is going to put points up on your great defense. And last year's defense was better than this year's defense for Georgia. You knew they were going to score. CJ Stroud was picking you apart. Your offense had to be able to answer to help them. They did it. You had this year a couple times this year, you had Auburn game. You were down late in the game. You had to make that comeback and win. South Carolina had you for a little while in the game. Missouri was challenging you against on this season. Big game you needed, going into Ole Miss and then Tennessee. Like big game, you had top 10 matchups kind of thing before you got into Tennessee. That one wasn't top 10, but you needed a big game against Ole Miss to kind of show the world. And so the college football playoff finally put you in first place after you beat Ole Miss. And then you needed to continue to show that you were a dominant team against a big opponent on the road in Knoxville against Tennessee, and you did it. And then now you get kind of a week in between where it's like everybody expects you to beat Georgia Tech by a lot, and maybe you start resting some players that are dealing with some nagging injuries and things like that, and then the game kind of gets up on you a little bit. I think Georgia goes into Saturday very, very much motivated and knowing that they are capable of playing a good game, and they will play a good game to go up against Alabama. But like you said, Alabama will do the same. They're coming off of a not good game that they should have lost against Auburn last week. They've got something to prove this week, and they know that this is a must-win situation for them. If they lose, they're a 2-loss team. They have a 0% chance of making the college football playoff. If they win, yes, there's some things that need to happen to get them in, but they at least give themselves the opportunity for the committee to make a decision. They make it hard for the committee. Georgia, if you lose, you've got to now you're relying on the fact that the committee has to make a hard decision. And I just went through who the teams I think would get in over you. Unless Texas loses, I don't think you're going to have a chance. And if that happens, if Texas loses, then Alabama's going to slip in because they beat you. You would need Texas and Florida State to lose for you to be able to get in if you don't win this game. So I think everything is on the line for this game. They know how much is at stake. They're going to go out there and play their best football. And that's what I expect from Kirby Smart's coach team over the past couple of years. When they need a game, they're going to give it to you. And this one has all the writing on the wall that if you lose, you are sitting out, and there won't be an SEC team in the playoffs this year, which is crazy to think about, but it's true.
Something interesting to note, too, is, Carson Beck, I think he would love to add an SEC title next to his name as a starting quarterback. He has the rings and he has an SEC title last year as a backup, but also he was once committed to Alabama. He was once going to go play for the University of Alabama. At least I believe that is correct. During his recruitment process, he was at one point committed to Alabama, and then he switched his commitment and decided to go play at the University of Georgia. So there's quite a bit of emotion and something to prove for himself as well going into this game. And that's kind of been the whole thing with Carson this year. He has played this entire season this is what I have been waiting to do. I have been itching and waiting to get my turn to show everybody just what they have been missing out on in 15, and that this is my team too. And I'm a freaking good quarterback as well. And I want my name in the same history books that we put Stetson Bennett in as well. And he has earned every right to put his name in that same tier. And now it's just a matter of you got to finish the drill and you got to actually do it. So really excited for this weekend. You got anything else to add, Stoddard?
No, I think that's good for me.
Okay, well, first off, Dan, you're never going to see me with a beard like Stoddard's. I just can't rock it. That's not my vibe. I'm not going to do it. So spoiler alert, you're never going to see it. This is about as much as you're going to get with me, all right? Anyways, like and subscribe if you haven't already, guys. Do all that good stuff for you. Thank you for showing up, even though we took the last 2 weeks off. And we always appreciate you guys seeing new faces, too, in the comments. We love seeing you guys interact, conversate with each other throughout the show as well. Even if it isn't directly correlated to what we're talking about, we love seeing you guys interact. It does a great deal of support for us. So keep on showing up for us. Hopefully we'll have some more good football games to talk about after next week. And next Sunday, we'll be talking about who Georgia is facing in the college football playoff. But do all that good stuff for us. Like, subscribe, follow us on social media, which Stoddard will be dropping right below right now. Look at there. There's the ads right there. Follow us on Twitter if you haven't already. And Stoddard, you can close us out.
Yeah, hey, as always, keep it classy in the Classic City. We will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Classic City Sports. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Classic City Sports Crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at the Stodfather, to Jonathan at Dr._J Will, and make sure to follow at Classic City Pod for show updates. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime,
two simple words which express the sentiments of the entire Bulldog Nation.